now we are joined by two eminent personalities from South Africa. So let me introduce you. On my left is Khadija Patel, and Khadija, is the editor of Mail and Guardian in South Africa, which is quite a big news brand. And we have William Bird, who is from Media Monitoring Group, and pretty much what William does is keeps an eye on how media is reporting stories across all of Southern Africa, we can say, or most of Southern Africa.
Yes, we try.
Okay, great. So Khadija, coming to you, how is the media landscape in South Africa?
I think it's a very vibrant landscape. Of course, like media everywhere else in the world, we're facing challenges. Those challenges are commercial challenges, they're political challenges, and again, they're not unique to South Africa. They're very similar to issues faced elsewhere, but of course there are certain strands of the challenges that we face in South Africa that are unique to us. There's always been a healthy resentment between the state and the media, healthy because it shows that that media has always been doing its job and always been a source of irritation to the state and to those in power. But increasingly, we're seeing the might of the state that can also be used to bully the media as well.
So they try their luck, right? So.
Yeah, certainly but it's not just trying their luck, but in certain instances they can actually push through when threats to withhold advertising and things like that pose an existential threat to commercial media.
So it's pretty much same as India. Like if you piss off the ruling party, then the best weapon they have is to withdraw the ad, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, very, very similar. So again, we're not unique, and this is why it's important for us to have these conversations to be able to swap best practice.
Yeah, but then the good thing that you said, that it's a healthy tension that you have. The journalists, I don't think in South Africa have to face assassination, or do they ever end up getting in jail, for the fact that they reported, or their reporting had angered the establishment.
So unfortunately, we don't have a huge sort of precedence of that. We've had incidents, for example, where a community journalist was killed during a protest, while doing his job, and it's a case that didn't get much attention because it wasn't mainstream website. And William, do you remember what year it was? It was a few years ago, I think. 2011, somewhere there. Okay. Again, it wasn't a case that got huge attention because it was a community journalist. He didn't have the might of a big media brand behind him. And rest assured that had that been one of my journalists or a journalist from another big media company, we'd be speaking about it even here in Ghana. So there are issues, the thing is that I think what we have to understand is that particularly in South Africa, we've got a huge problem with the way that, for example, protests are policed. And this manifests itself in various ways, and for example access to those scenes often is restricted for media, and in certain cases the media gets caught up between the police and protesters, and we've had several instances. I've had my own journalists being shot by rubber bullets, etc., being affected by tear gas, stun grenades. Because often in cases like this, the police don't differentiate between media and protesters. You're all the same. So there are those kinds of sort of like on the ground issues that we face. But certainly there is when I think we're fortunate, and maybe William can speak a little bit more about this, in that we still do have a very robust judiciary, and I think that is one of the greatest assets for us in guarding media freedom.
So robust judiciary, Khadija said, there's something that happened which is deemed as quite landmark event today, right? So would you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I do, but I want to just touch on this thing. So as much as, we've got a lot of very brave / crazy journalists, which is a common elements to them all over the world, it seems, We have witnessed, though, in the last few years, a significant increase in attacks on journalists. Our government, because of the political infighting that they're going through now, means that any kind of reputable media basically are systematically challenged and attacked, usually verbally, but we're seeing some very worrying and very disturbing threats that are emerging now. And as the political tension increases, those things are going to get higher. So we saw that there's sites that are deliberately spreading misinformation campaigns. They are targeting, of course, women primarily.
And
they suggest that they're having sexual relations with people, all sorts of things.
Okay.
And that, I think, is certainly on the increase. And it's something that we have to guard against. Fortunately, though, we've got media that are brave that are going to continue to expose that stuff. Yeah. And we've got a strong judiciary. So on the judiciary front, what's happened recently is there was a very prominent murder a few years ago, and the trial has just come to court now. Effectively, what happened is that this young man has been charged with hacking his family to death with an axe. So it took place in a very wealthy house. There were white people involved, which of course gives it greater prominence in our media circles. So there's a lot of media interest in this case. Gory details, family murder, that sort of thing. So it's very, it's got a high level of public interest. It's interesting to the public, not public interest. Anyway, so one of the media houses applied to broadcast the trial, and the judge in the trial said, yes, I think that you can do this. The accused and the state then said, no, we don't want this, and so it went to our Supreme Court of Appeal, which is just one layer below our constitutional court. Yeah. And we went to the Supreme Court of Appeal. Media Monitoring Africa appeared as an amicus in that case, and we argued that this is not just a blanket thing that you can say you shouldn't just allow media to be everywhere, because there are some very real concerns about, for example, if it's a sexual affairs case or offences case, you don't want those things to be broadcast everywhere, so their rights of a fair trial, etc. But what the court did was they looked around the world and they said they couldn't find international precedent on this, and they knew that judges were struggling with this, and so judgments have just been handed down today where they said these are some common principles that we're going to apply when you start to look at the issue of whether media should be allowed to broadcast criminal trials. Wow. So it's really precedent setting, because it means that judges now in your country might refer to it, and it's it's one of those things that just makes me feel so immensely proud of our judicial system and our nation. That we, we're a small country on our continent, and yet we've done something where we've set precedent.
I think that I'm glad that I'm speaking to both of you, because I don't know how much you are aware about what's going on in India right now, and I think the story about that, the Supreme Court of Appeal, sort of giving this landmark judgment, I think will be an eye-opener for our judiciary in India, because judiciary in India has come under immense flack for being compromised or for towing the agenda of the ruling party, which is having a knock-on impact on our ability to report freely. So I'm glad that I spoke to you. Coming back to you, Khadija, I see you in a Islamic attire. Now, it's no big deal. It shouldn't be a big deal, but it is a big deal. Not just in the part where we live in, but in many parts around the world. Do you get judged, by your attire, in South Africa?
I don't think so. I mean, I've always been dressed like this. I've worked as a journalist like this, so I think that my identity is, well put forward.
But I'll tell you, in this attire, you would never go beyond your reporter's designation in India. That's a reality.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it speaks to the South African culture and the fact that I think that we are much more open.
Multicultural, truly multicultural. Yeah.
So, I mean, certainly not to my face has anyone in South Africa, been discriminated against me. Of course, when I was appointed editor-in-chief of the Mail and Guardian, I received some comments. I was even asked live on radio. Would I be able to handle, for example, Secretary General of the ruling party? Surely I wouldn't be able to, because I'm too. The assertion there is because I'm young, I'm a woman, etc. And I bristled against that. I was very, very annoyed by that, because I don't think the same question would be asked about a man. True. In that situation. So it is, so I think that when it comes to discrimination, it certainly isn't overt, but prejudice is very internalized. And in South Africa, where we're still emerging from a very, very terrible history of institutionalized racism, which still exists, of course, you're going to face some of those, the ramifications of that, work. But it's something that that I've always been very conscious of, and I don't allow it to dictate who I am. And I mean, I don't put myself forward as a headscarf-clad journalist or headscarf-clad editor. I'm just the editor of the Mail and Guardian, and it
happens to be your
and I mean, and the fact that if others can only see my scarf and can only see
it's
my long
problem.
sleeves, it says a lot about that person then.
True.
That they cannot see beyond my attire to actually understand and relate to me as a human being.
I mean, you have no idea after this interview how many women in India we are going to inspire, you have absolutely, because we are constantly having this debate in India. So as I was saying in my intervention in the session yesterday, that anybody who criticizes government today in India is immediately declared anti-national, and if you happen to have a Muslim name like me, you are also a jihadi. God knows what would they have called you, with your Islamic attire. So you monitor media, sort of quite in the large part of Southern Africa. What is your sense? I mean, South Africa has a vibrant media scene. What is the scene beyond South Africa in the region that you monitor media?
So there's some very worrying trends that we're seeing, particularly in a country like Zambia, which until very recently has been. I think we've been quite optimistic about it and its media environment sort of becoming more open. Recently we've seen some very clear and deliberate attacks on media there. They even stopped the leader of our major opposition party from landing and going and visiting the leader of their opposition there. So there's quite a strong clampdown. We've seen journalists in Lesotho being attacked. In Swaziland there's very low levels of media freedom. Zimbabwe, of course, is on the agenda as a perennial kind of item. And yet, within those, and despite those things, you're seeing incredible stories coming out of there. People are using either clever technology or clever tactics, like those Zambezi news people who go and use satire to continue to make sure that the issues stay on the agenda. So it's not a news story about media freedom in Zimbabwe is still just about non-existent. They're using satire. So I think there's a lot of, despite those things, there's a lot of room to be optimistic. Where I think our next and emerging challenges are going to be coming from, and where we need to be really on the ball and on guard, is around the online regulatory issues.
Okay. Is that an issue there?
In South Africa, our government has put out a draft bill on hate speech and hate crimes. We've also seen a move.
So all social media, digital platforms.
Yes.
Okay.
And we've also seen a very deliberate move to try and regulate online media. Again, some of it is clearly done with a very clear political agenda. So luckily, again, we've got a strong media sector, strong civil society sector, where we'll use lobbying and advocacy, and then we'll go to the courts and use those to make sure that whatever bills come before us are strongly challenged. But I think that we're already seeing trends in countries like Malawi, where there's a desire also to clamp down on online media and regulation, and they're using some of the fights that are happening globally around hate speech to say, you see, this is why we need to clamp down on these things, and if we don't, then anything goes and it'll destabilize our nation, etc., etc. So that's where I think the big threats are coming from.
The last, what would you say to the hundreds of thousands of journalists in India who are going through a very turbulent time at the moment? What would be your message for them?
Gosh, I guess it's a very hard thing to do, but I think that we have to constantly remind ourselves. I mean, I tell my newsroom that we have to constantly remind ourselves about why we do what we do. And journalists, we're not here because we want to be rich. Certainly, nobody becomes a journalist because they want to be rich. But I think that we are invested in the idea of a better world, a more just world. That's why we are journalists. And I think that it's imperative that we hold holy that idea, and also ensure that we are constantly championing this idea for a better world, and we're fighting for it, and fighting indeed against any semblance of opposition to a more just and equitable world.
Very powerful messages. You're William, talking to Indian journalists.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you improve on what Khadija's just said, but clearly, you know,
you can never. Nobody can improve on what Khadija said.
I know, now we're going to be like
yes.
the fan base will just follow him.
Yeah. No, so let me give you a cue. So a lot of people, like yesterday, head of Amnesty International, he was telling me that look, if you end up infuriating the government, hold it as a badge of honor. That's good, but that doesn't mean it doesn't actually give you any consolation once you lose your job. You still have to pay for your children's education, you still have to pay the rent of your house. So in that case, what's your kind of word of wisdom for the journalists? How should they sort of conduct themselves?
They've got to do what you're doing. You've got to be brave, despite and you risk the consequences of those things, and then you've got to be brave and you've got to be innovative. To survive as a journalist under difficult constraints, either due to political pressures or overt media freedom limitations, you've got to be brave and you've got to make sure that you innovate. Otherwise, you aren't going to do your job. But the critical thing is, as Khadija says, is you're not there to make money, you're there to make the world a better place. And for journalists, I guess the thing is, I've just forgotten the point I was going to make. It's quite a good one. But, I'll leave it with being brave and being innovative, because that's...
No, I think for me the message is, we don't become journalists to make money or to become rich. I think that is the message for Indian journalists, who have thrown the ethics out of the window for the want of money. And I think, you know who I'm talking about. Just listen to Khadija. It's not just I saying that in India. The ethical journalists up and down the world, they will say the same thing. So thank you very much for being part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.